I'm really irritated by because I could be, I could come with us less than 2 because I didn't have it. And I just really but anyway, after the test, and I would have had a 92 if I didn't miss. I got a 87. What he said after I was about to leave, he was like, you should have been here. You would have got the better score. And I'm like, I couldn't really help it. You know.
I'm a Twitter person.
I didn't really feel like funny thing though, my check went through, so I just said leaving the house. Well, that.
Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to another one of our town hall meetings. I'm Andy Barr. I'm your new congressman representing the Central and Eastern Kentucky Congressional District, the 6th District of Kentucky. And before we start today, I'd like to recognize all of our veterans in the room. For those of you who have served our country in uniform and are veterans, would you please stand? We want to thank you. So particularly in light of the fact that Monday is Veterans Day. And we want to start tonight's town hall meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance. And I'd like to ask Jane from our Veterans Coalition to lead us in the pledge. Jane, would you be willing to do that?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, I guess a town hall meeting in Winchester, Kentucky would not be complete without my ALA. So we've got that all squared away. I want to thank BCTC for hosting us tonight. I also want to point out my staff who is here with us tonight, and I'd like to recognize them. My district director, Colleen Cheney, right over here. She heads up our district office over in Lexington. The facility is in Hamburg, so if you ever need to visit us in our district office, it's very accessible to Winchester, right down there off of Man of War on Sir Barr. And then we have Andy Hightower, my senior policy advisor. Andy's also in the district office. We have over here Catherine, and Catherine Gatewood is our communications director. She actually works in our Washington office, but she's here with us today. We've got Aaron Thompson. Aaron Thompson was registering folks outside, and Sergeant Tyler White, right here. Tyler, raise your hand. Sergeant White represents you all here. He is the field representative for Clark County. So when we hold our office hours as part of our accessibility initiative, it's Sergeant White who will be your direct liaison to our office. And he also staffs our Veterans Coalition. Anybody else who's here tonight? Is that it? Okay, we covered everybody there. This town hall meeting is part of a series of town hall meetings that we're conducting throughout the 6th District. We have these town hall meetings in each of the 19 counties. We have telephone town halls, and we also have the various office hours. And you can find office hours on our website, bar.house.gov. So if you or your family or people you work with or folks you go to church with ever need anything from our office, whether it's issue dealing with veterans benefits, or if it's cutting through the red tape in Washington, or if it's just feedback or suggestions for us, you can always talk to Tyler when he comes to the courthouse here. And Tyler, can you tell us your office hours? Oh, Tyler, sorry. He's stealthy. He's a Marine.
The second Wednesday of every month from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. and it's in City Hall's fiscal court room.
Well, thank you very much. So we also have coalitions. We've got the Veterans Coalition, as I mentioned. We also have Agriculture Coalition, other coalitions. So if you're interested in joining a particular coalition, we can talk to you about that. Just a quick couple of ground rules before we get started. We want to, because we have so many people here tonight, we'd like to kind of keep it to, if you've got one question, we'll leave it to one question for you because we want to get to as many folks as possible. Obviously, we want to be respectful with one another. Our country, there's a lot of difficult challenges facing our country right now. There's difference of opinion. Let's have respect for one another, and let's kind of hold to that decorum. This is an official event. It's not a political rally. It's an official event. And so what we want to do is respond to your questions in my capacity as a congressman and on behalf of your congressional representative. And I'll just start with just a few brief remarks and then open it up for questions. I was over, this morning I was over in Lexington. We visited the Cardinal Hill Rehabilitation Hospital. We had a good morning there. And then we went to Georgetown, had a town hall meeting, Meet Your Congressman event in downtown Georgetown. And then we ended up over at Royal Spring Middle School. And at Royal Spring Middle School, an 8th grade student stood up and asked me a great question. And he said, Mr. Barr, what is your job? What do you do as congressman? And it was a really good and very fundamental question. And my answer was that my job is to represent you and to be your advocate and champion in Washington. That means I get to promote the people of Central and Eastern Kentucky. I get to promote the signature industries of Kentucky. And my job is to listen to you and do the best job I can in being a forceful advocate for you in Washington. And that means we've got signature industries that we want to promote. Signature industries like the coal industry, signature industries like the bourbon distilling industry, the thoroughbred horse industry. We've got a lot of beef cattle, Toyota auto manufacturing, the supply chain around Central Kentucky, and even Ale Lake. So I was just over at Ale Lake bottling just the other day, visiting with them and talking to them about what some of their challenges are. So that's really what I want to do tonight. I want to listen to you about how you want me to be an advocate for you and the people of Central Kentucky. And one of the things that I keep hearing when I travel the district and what people are telling me, and what people told me during my campaigns for Congress was they want us to stop spending the money we don't have. The American people are justifiably frustrated. They're fed up with Washington politicians right now. They've seen the political gridlock. They see the president's approval rating at its lowest in this presidency. Congress's approval rating is only, according to one poll, only 9%. The right track, wrong track numbers are really unbelievable. In other words, the vast majority of Americans think the country is moving in the wrong direction as opposed to in the right direction. And so what the people are telling me is, why can't the politicians in Washington get their act together and actually stop fighting and start fixing problems? And that's what we need to do. We need to stop fighting and start fixing problems. But as important as it is that we prevent a government shutdown, for example, or raise the debt ceiling and avert a default, and those are critically important, and I certainly want to avoid a government shutdown, and I want to prevent a default on our debt, obviously. As important as those objectives are, it is equally important that we stop doing business as usual in Washington, that we stop kicking the can down the road, that we start forcing the government to live within its means, that we stop spending money we don't have, that we stop mortgaging our children's future. And the crisis that faces us is really not as much one of ideology or party, it's more one of mathematics. The math doesn't work anymore. We have run $1 trillion deficits for 4 consecutive years. We are adding to the national debt approximately $20 billion every single week in this country. And after all of the conflict, the political conflict and the bickering in Washington and the government shutdown in the last week, how did that end? Not with a solution, not with a bipartisan solution, not with any kind of reforms of our government to put the country on a path towards a balanced budget, but another kicking the can down the road, just raising the debt ceiling with no reforms. And my message to my constituents is, the reason why I voted the way I did was, I think it is unfair. It is absolutely unfair to young people and to future generations of Americans to raise the debt limit without any reforms, without getting federal spending under control, or without saving future generations from national bankruptcy. And then that's a moral obligation that we have, our generation. For the first time in American history, a majority of Americans believe that the next generation will have fewer opportunities than they will have. A majority of Americans believe that their kids and their grandkids will have a lower standard of living. And we've never seen that in the history of our country. The trajectory of American history has always been the American dream, that we want our kids to have a better shot than we have. We want to give them a better opportunity than we have. Well, that's starting to slip away because politicians in Washington are not accountable, and because politicians in Washington are spending this country into bankruptcy. So we've got to get that under control. I know that the President's health care law, Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, is a topic of grave concern to many of my constituents. We are getting inundated in my office with emails, phone calls, letters from people who are either seeing they're getting cancellation notices of their health insurance, they're getting their premium renewals. We're hearing from health benefits consultants over in Lexington, and they've shown us lists of their small group plans and their individuals who they help navigate the private health insurance marketplace. They're getting their premium renewals, and because of the mandates in the new health care law, their premiums are going up 50, 60, 70, sometimes 100%. This is a bigger problem than just an $88 million website that doesn't work. And that's a bad problem to have. That $88 million of hard-working taxpayers have wasted on a website that doesn't work and that's not secure, that's a problem. But the problems go beyond a broken website. The problems are that millions of Americans are losing health insurance that they currently like. The problem is that millions of Americans are losing their doctors in some cases. And the problem is that employers are having to scale back hours and lay off workers in anticipation of the employer mandate that the President delayed for 1 year. And finally, I'll just say this. The American people and my constituents tell me this all the time. They want me and their representatives in Washington to hold the bureaucrats in Washington accountable. They want to hold Washington more accountable. And when I got to Washington, I was struck by a couple of things. Number one, the Senate hadn't passed a budget in 4 years. Think about that. Duly elected senators in the United States Senate hadn't done the most basic responsibility of governing in 4 years. They hadn't even passed a budget. And so I co-sponsored a bill that we passed out of the House called the No Budget, No Pay Act. It's a simple piece of legislation that says if the politicians in Washington can't even do the most basic responsibility of governing, then they shouldn't get paid. Well, guess what? That bill passed, and the Senate passed a budget for the first time in 4 years. Now, that was a good thing. The only problem was that their budget that they passed, raised taxes, increased spending, didn't reform government, and never balanced the budget. The budget that we passed out of the House cut spending by almost $5 trillion. It reformed the tax code. It would have saved Medicare and Social Security for future generations of Americans. And it balanced the budget in 10 years. That's the kind of reforms we really need in this country. And then when I found out that members of Congress and their staff get a special deal under Obamacare, I introduced a simple bill called the Live by the Laws You Write Act. It's H.R. 2010. The law actually requires members of Congress and their staff to go into the Obamacare exchanges, but several members of the congressional staff were exempt. So leadership staff and committee staff, frankly, the people who actually wrote the law, they're exempted from the exchanges. And then the Obama administration, through the Office of Personnel Management, issued an administrative decision that allowed members of Congress and their staff to take a special subsidy that they currently get in their federal employee health benefits plan and take it with them into the exchange. This is a special subsidy that the millions of Americans who are currently losing their health insurance, their job-based health insurance, they don't get to take that special subsidy with them. They don't get to take their employer contribution into the exchange when they are forced into the exchanges. And so I just think it's fundamentally wrong that the politicians in Washington live under one set of rules and the American people are forced into a totally different set of rules. That's not right. If Obamacare is such a great solution for health care in this country, if Obamacare is such good policy, then why won't the politicians in Washington actually participate in it? If it's good enough for the American people, it should be good enough for the president, for members of the cabinet, members of Congress, and their staff. They should be forced to live by the same law that they have imposed on the American people. So, with that, let me just stop right there. That's a brief update of where we are in Washington. I know that you all are frustrated. I know that the American people are frustrated. It shouldn't be about political parties or agendas. It should be about getting things done and saving our country from bankruptcy. I have optimism and hope. A positive attitude is critical, especially in these days and times. And I'm committed to working and trying to find these solutions. In divided government, you can't get everything you want. I think it is incumbent upon those of us in Congress to come together in the next few months, prevent what we saw the last couple of months, and actually forge some kind of a solution for the American people. So thank you all very much for your interest in coming, and I look forward to your questions. And we'll just raise your hand if you have a question. Yes, sir.
You want us to stand up or just?
Go ahead. Yes, if you don't mind, stand up and identify your name and make your comment.
Larry Stewart. I'm from Lexington, originally. Congressman, this administration, this regime we have, they've done so many things that it's hard to know where to try to do correct. It's just innovative. I'm going to make an observation. The First Amendment says that Congress will make no laws establishing their religion. And that's where all the atheists and the unionists run around. They forget the second part, which says that you will not do anything to forbid or prevent the free exercise thereof. I'd like for the Congress to start stopping the ACLU from using the power of the federal government to come in and oppress, persecute, and destroy Christianity and our traditional values. It's just really, it's to the point where I'm angry. These people have no right to come in and practice extortion on the citizens of Kentucky or of America. It's wrong. And Congress is sitting there and letting the Constitution be trampled upon. And I really, really hope that you can sense my frustration. And I got to guarantee you, I'm not the only person who feels this way. A lot of us do. And it's getting very angry. God turns around and he says, "You don't want me? All right, I'll back out." And when God backs out, guess who comes in? And that's what we see. We see confusion, strife, animosity, enmity, destruction running across this land. And it's only change when we recognize that there is a God Almighty, and he needs to be acknowledged, appreciated, and respected. And I really hope that you'll carry this thing. By the way, I think you're doing a marvelous job. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. In the chamber, in the U.S. House of Representatives chamber, there's the inscription "In God We Trust." There's also a frieze of Moses as a great lawgiver that is above at the very top of the House chamber as well. We must never forget the foundational principles upon which this nation was founded, and the majesty and the greatness of our nation comes from those foundational principles that are enshrined in our Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. And Thomas Jefferson so eloquently wrote in the Declaration of Independence that we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. It was a recognition that our rights come not from government, but from our Creator. And government is there not to give us rights, to confer upon us rights. Our Constitution is designed to protect us from the government, and that's very important. We need to protect our Bill of Rights, stand up for our Bill of Rights. And thank you for your comment. Yes, sir. Back in the back.
Ben Jefferson, I live here in Winchester, Northside. As this regime's obedience has evolved, from things that were said during this campaign and what's going on now, and we're finding out now, or out now in my eyes, in my opinion, what are people going to start talking about the impeachment? And I don't see why we're not able to impeach somebody who's here and lie the entire thing. What does it take to do that? I realize impeachment doesn't mean he's going out of office. It's meant to charge somebody with that, my opinion.
Thank you, Mr. Jefferson, for your question. The role of Congress, there's three branches of government, and we have a constitutional responsibility to provide the lawmakers, the legislative branch, the Congress, has a responsibility to exercise oversight over the executive branch. And at least in the House, we are doing that. We have been conducting oversight hearings. Chairman Darrell Issa is the chairman of the House Oversight, Government Reform and Oversight Committee. He's been conducting vigorous oversight into the Benghazi matter, into the IRS political targeting case. The Ways and Means Committee, their oversight subcommittee, is engaged in that as well. In fact, even in my own committee, the Financial Services Committee, we've conducted oversight over the Treasury Department into the Treasury Department's role in the IRS targeting scandal. There are other matters of oversight that are required, and we need to continue to do that. If we didn't, we wouldn't be doing our job. Now, let's just take the Benghazi matter, for example. The Benghazi situation is really about a simple idea. And that is when our military, when our men and women in uniform are deployed overseas, particularly in hostile places like Libya, for example, or when our foreign service personnel and our ambassador is deployed to outposts like a Benghazi, that we owe it to them, and they deserve that when they're placed into harm's way, that their government has their back.
Absolutely. Right.
And the Benghazi situation is a very, it triggers a great deal of concern for me, for this congressman, because what it says to me is that our government abandoned 4 patriots, 4 heroes. And they deserve better than that. Their families deserve answers. That's why this oversight is so critical, so that this never ever happens again. Those families don't have answers. Why was it that the calls for additional security in the months leading up to the terrorist attack on the anniversary of 9/11, not only were those requests for additional security denied, but security was actually affirmatively withdrawn? Was it because it was in the middle of a political campaign? Was it because it didn't fit with the narrative that we had won the war on terror? Was that the reason? Chairman Issa is doing those investigations. There are those hearings that are ongoing, and we will continue until we get the truth. Same with the IRS scandal. Those are important matters that Congress has a responsibility to engage in. To be direct with your question, that procedure is a political, not a legal procedure. And and it's a constitutional procedure, which means that the American people have to decide when that is warranted, when that procedure is warranted. And as a result of that, the prerequisite is oversight. We've got to do that oversight as a prerequisite, because the American people are not where you are, that I can tell. It is a constitutional procedure. It's not a legal procedure. It's not something like that. It's got to be, there has to be a broad consensus in the country before that kind of procedure can move forward. Yes, sir.
We have many problems in this nation. We have many problems in this nation, but one thing that's been on my mind today, and it's very simplistic, but I've read several places, I've received stuff in the mail about this administration is trying to shut down Fox News. Well, the fact that the other side of the coin would be quiet and nothing could be said from the opposite side is a problem that seems like the president in particular, it's either my way or no way. This is the way it's going to be. I don't want anybody else to oppose me. I don't want anybody else to say anything against me. You know, that seems to be a real big problem because there's no cooperation that way.
Yes, sir. And so your question is specifically the question. Sorry.
It may not be a question, but it seems to be a real problem because the president has no intention of cooperating. I mean, it's his way or no way, and he doesn't want anybody to have anything to say against him. That seems to be the case, and that's been on my mind today. That's the thing that I keep thinking about. It's just like the president does not want to listen to anyone. He wants to. It's either his way or no way, and that seems to be the way it is. And and we need both sides. We need both sides, but there's no cooperation that way. If he always has to have his way, which appears to be the way, if he always has to have his way, there's no way to accomplish anything. And he always feels like he's right, and everyone else is wrong.
Right. So I agree with your comments, your sentiment there. One of the problems that we had during the last month or so was that the president would not talk. So, in divided government, the only way forward is through negotiation and compromise. There has to be a negotiation, but if the president won't even talk, there cannot be a negotiation. And you're right, there was an unyielding and stubborn refusal to compromise. The American people deserve better than that. The president had the government and had a single-party control of the government the first 2 years that he was in office. He ran through Obamacare on a party line vote. Dodd-Frank, other policies of this administration were ran through on a party line vote. And the American people didn't like it. And so they elected a House of Representatives controlled by the opposite party. The American people sent a signal in 2010 that they wanted a check and balance to this president. And in 2012, while they did re-elect the president, they also re-elected a Republican House of Representatives, which means the American people voted for divided government. And the only way to move the country forward in divided government is for those checks and balances, that system, to operate the way the Founding Fathers intended it. Which doesn't mean government is inherently unworkable. It just means that the leaders in Washington need to sit down and negotiate. And there needs to be checks and balances. That's how divided government is supposed to work. So the president should not expect to get everything he wants. And frankly, Republicans in the House shouldn't expect to get everything we want. That is the way divided government has to operate.
He seems to punish people that go against him. I mean, we have examples, like for example, of that. And that's not right. I mean, that's a poor way of living.
I hear what you're saying, sir. Thank you for your comment. Ben.
Congressman, good to have you here. I'm Ben Berger from Powell County. And you were talking about spending, and we've got to stop our spending, and I agree wholeheartedly. And what areas do you see we need to start or stop this spending? Or is it low-lying fruit to start with, or what are your ideas as far as stopping the spending?
There's plenty of waste, fraud, and abuse in the government. There's waste, fraud, and abuse in virtually every part of the government. I'm a member of the Yellow Pages Caucus. That may sound funny to you, but that caucus is dedicated to rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse. But more than that, it's dedicated to ending government programs that compete with private sector activity. So for example, if you can look in the Yellow Pages and find a product, goods, or services offered through the private sector in the Yellow Pages, why on earth is the government doing any of that? Why should the government compete with private sector companies? Why should the government displace private sector activity? That's one place to start. But the truth is, we can cut out waste, fraud, and abuse. We can apply the rigorous Yellow Pages test to all these government programs. We can limit the size and scope and the cost and the lack of accountability of the government. But the difficult truth is that what is driving our long-term debt and deficits are mandatory spending. Now, mandatory spending, autopilot spending, spending that the Congress doesn't control through the appropriations process, consists of 4 areas of the budget: Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and interest on the national debt. The debt crisis we face right now is this: that if we make no reforms in mandatory spending, in about 15 years, 100% of all federal revenues will be consumed by those 4 items in the budget: Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and interest on the national debt. So, if we decide to keep putting our heads in the sand, if politicians continue to say there's not a problem, if politicians in Washington continue to try to use political scare tactics and scare our seniors, what's going to happen is, number one, the government's going to start breaking its promises to our seniors. And number two, the government's going to start, the spending in our government is going to crowd out all of the other responsibilities of government. So think about it. With no reform, 15 years from now, 100% of all federal revenue consumed by those 4 items in the budget, which means there will be no money for national security. There will be no money for homeland security. There will be $0 for the Federal Aviation Administration and our air traffic controllers. There will be no money for the University of Kentucky, no money for Pell Grants, no money for any of the research and development, no money for any of the roads, bridges, transportation infrastructure, any of the responsibilities of government that we typically think is the job of the government. So this is the nature of our crisis, and and again, it's a math problem, not as much an ideological problem. And so the answer is, we need to reform our mandatory spending programs, not by cutting benefits for current seniors, not by cutting benefits for people nearing retirement, but for making some structural changes for younger people, so that the government doesn't break its promises to them. That's how we do it. Yes, sir.
So, my name is John Berg.
No, Jonathan?
Yeah, Jonathan Berg.
By the way, Jonathan has served our country in the Marines.
Yes, I've had 2 tours to Afghanistan, 1 deployment on a MU, which is the location. One question I keep asking a lot of individuals is, when is America going to realize that there's one really common trait with all terrorism? With all terrorist organizations, there's one underlying factor that's true with all of them, is the fact that they're all Muslims. And the sooner I feel like that America starts to accept as whole that it's not so much a terrorist organization, because even with the Taliban, even with the Al-Qaeda and all these offshoot terrorist organizations, the one thing that's always common is the fact that they are all the same religion. And I'm not saying we should all single out the religion and all seek them out and destroy them. But the fact that we are obviously not wanting to see and identify them for what they are doing, when do you think we're finally going to be able to acknowledge that as a nation and to be able to actually use that so that our military is no longer trying to pick and choose people out of a giant civilian population? Because the one problem the military has in every single deployment, in every combat zone, every conflict with terrorism, is that we walk into an environment and what do we see? I see civilians. 360 degrees, 367, every single day in every single location. And I talked to one person one day, I talked to one local one day, and they're nice and they're kind. They're all like, hey, I'm your friend, blah, blah, blah. Next day, what's happened? Around the corner, he's shooting at me with an AK. It's happened more times than I like to say. But the fact is, it's like, it's their people, it's their way of life, it's their religion, it's them. They're the ones that started the jihad. As they've said very clearly, Muslims started the jihad against American citizens because they hate who we are and what we stand for. So when do you think America, as a nation, will finally acknowledge that we need to put a watchful eye on those people?
First of all, thank you for your service. Frankly, you know more about this than most people because you've been there and you've looked it straight in the eye. So I respect your opinion greatly. The truth, you spoke the truth. There are people in this world who want to kill Americans. This is a dangerous world. You know, those of us who, remember, and we all do, we all remember 9/11. We remember watching our fellow countrymen die jumping to their deaths from the top floors of the World Trade Center. We saw that plane go into the Pentagon and kill our fellow countrymen. And that's seared in my memory forever. The fact that the world has changed, that this country is vulnerable to attack if we do not, if we're not proactive and if we are not vigilant against Islamic terrorists. And so, our national security is not something that we can choose whether or not we're doing. We have to do it. It's an existential threat. It's an existential threat to our friend Israel. What concerns me greatly is Iran's nuclear ambitions. Iran is close to a nuclear weapon. And this administration's foreign policy has been a dramatic failure in preventing the nuclearization of Iran. And the fact that the president is willing to negotiate with the leaders of Iran, but not negotiate with the duly elected representatives of the people in Congress is a very, very disturbing thing. But thank you for your service. I believe that we need to stabilize our debt and deficit situation so that, number one, we can take care of our veterans when they come home after they've served our country, and also so that we're not displacing the important investments we need in readiness and weapon systems to make sure we defend our country. Thank you. Yes, sir, right here, Jeff.
Oh, thank you. Can I hold that, or you got it? Okay, thanks. Congressman Barr, before I ask my question, I'd like to apologize to you personally. I was at your luncheon meeting in Georgetown today, and I was in a hurry to get here. I had a lot of things to do, and I forgot my tie. So I'm sorry about that.
That's okay.
Thank you. Thank you for being magnanimous.
No problem.
Thanks. Okay. So you have essentially signed on to the Paul Ryan budget. This is the budget the federal budget that Representative Paul Ryan has developed and gotten passed. Well, he's gotten all of the Republicans in the House to support it, and that because the Republicans have a majority in the House, for the last 3 years it's passed the House and gone on to the Senate where it died, didn't go anywhere. And I think you voted for it the third time. in 2013?
I voted for it, yes, I did vote for
This
it
year?
in April, I believe, yes.
April, okay, thank you.
March or April.
Right. So I consider it that you've adopted it as your own and support it, basically support the Ryan budget logically. So what it is, there's a problem with it. There is a gap of $5.7 trillion in the Ryan Barr budget. And some financial analysts have called it fraudulent. I know that's a strong word to use, but this gap means that the expected revenues don't match the projected revenues. And so the only way that you can cover that gap is by eliminating a whole lot of tax deductions that benefit the middle class. And some of those are the exclusion of employer health insurance, that might have to go. Exclusion, these tax deductions, the exclusion of employer pensions, that might be on the chopping block. So basically my question is, how are you gonna, which ones are you gonna cut? There's the mortgage interest deduction, there's the exclusion of Medicare, there's changes to the capital gains tax rates, there's the earned income credit that might have to go, there's the deduction of income taxes. So which ones are you gonna cut? There's the exclusion of death or gift carryover. There's the deduction of charitable contribution. Now that's an interesting one, because what that means is people who donate to charity, they wouldn't be able to deduct that from your taxes. And you just have to eat that.
I think I get the gist of your question. I get the gist of your question. I've heard
get the gist
yes,
of
sir.
it?
And I think I've heard this question before
You
from you.
have heard it
I'll
before.
answer it again.
All right, thank you.
A lot of those tax reforms that you cite are not included in the Ryan budget. A budget resolution is a blueprint that allows for policies to be enacted within it that put meat on the bone. The Ryan budget, the House Republican budget that I support and that I supported and will continue to support, cuts about almost $5 trillion in spending over 10 years. It reforms Medicare to save Medicare for future generations of Americans. It does not raise taxes. It allows for comprehensive tax reform that simplifies a system that is a nightmare for most Americans to comply with dizzying complexity, with a level of complexity. He's not interested in the answer, but the truth is, it cost he wasn't interested in the answer today either in Georgetown, unfortunately. But here's the answer to his question. The answer to the question is that there's $160 billion in hours of compliance for the American people. The only way you can effectively comply with the tax code today is if you're a large corporation or someone who's a wealthy individual who can afford a CPA and a tax lawyer, or an army of CPAs and tax lawyers, like Dudley Taylor, right? But the truth of the matter is, hardworking middle-class families should not have to have the difficulty of the tax code compliance that they do have, and then pay a huge tax bill at the end of the year. And so, what the Ryan bill does is it lays the groundwork for economic recovery, for economic growth. It finally forces the government to live within its means, and it balances the budget in 10 years. Now, wouldn't it be nice if we could balance the budget next year? The alternatives that were offered by the Senate and by the President, they raised taxes, they massively increased taxes, they didn't cut spending, they increased spending, and they never balanced the budget, ever. Now, it is true, when you don't balance the budget for 10 years, you continue to you continue to have deficits. The deficit, believe me though, the deficits under the Ryan plan, the House Republican budget, go down, 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 down until we balance the budget. And that's the direction we need to go. That's the right direction towards a balanced budget. So that's the right answer. And if there are better ideas out there, I'm ready to listen to them. But the only alternatives I've seen come out of anybody in Congress are budgets that increase taxes, that increase spending, and increase debt for the long run and never balance the budget. So those are not fiscally responsible alternatives for sure. Yes, sir, right back here.
I was going to ask you a question about the EPA, but with what the discussion that just came up, why do we not look at a better way of collecting taxes? Until the early 1900s, income taxes were deemed to be against the Constitution until the Constitution was changed so that they could collect income taxes. It's a penalizing system. It penalizes hard work, and it does not distribute it. You know, everybody says it needs to be fair, but there's nothing fair about it. If you work hard, you're going to be penalized further. Why have we not looked more readily at going to a consumption style tax, repealing the 16th Amendment, so that they can no longer take our taxes before we ever get our paycheck? And let's collect taxes from what people spend money on rather than what they earn, so that we can pass it down to our families and probably cause some economic growth. There was a study done, I'm sure you know there was a book written about the fair tax. There was a study done after that book was written asking industries that do not reside in the United States right now, if we were to go to the fair tax and get away from the system we have right now, would you move to the United States? 90% of them said they would move to the United States in the next 5 years.
Yeah, great question, and there's no doubt about it. Our tax code is a disaster. The chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, Dave Camp, likes to say it's the same. It's 70,000 pages with all the statutory code and the regulations and the explanations. So it's about the same length as the Bible with none of the good news. And it really is, it truly is a nightmare for so many people. It's a job-destroying tax code. And after Obamacare, now the IRS is going to be in charge of your health care. If you don't like the IRS now, if you think the IRS is harassing the American people right now, just wait until they get a hold of your health care. Obamacare empowers the Internal Revenue Service, the same Internal Revenue Service that targeted American citizens based on their political beliefs, with 47 new enforcement authorities. And Obamacare authorizes and directs the hiring of 16,000 new IRS agents, auditors. They've already asked Congress for $400 million in additional budget just to start the process of hiring new auditors, agents, enforcement personnel over at the IRS. So the virtue of your proposal and the virtue of the consumption tax or the fair tax is that you eliminate the IRS. And that there's certainly a great appeal to that. There is no support or very little support for the fair tax in the U.S. Senate right now, certainly not in the White House. So what we have to do is we've got to see if we can achieve some measure of tax simplification and tax reform on a bipartisan basis until we've got a more support for larger comprehensive tax reform. And so what our leaders over in the Ways and Means Committee are working on right now is tax reform that lowers rates, that broadens the base, that simplifies the tax code, and will promote more economic growth so that we get revenue not from raising taxes, but from more people actually getting jobs, more job creation, more taxpayers, more work, more people working, more people paying taxes. That's the way to grow our economy, and that's the way to stabilize, in part, our debt and deficit situation. I'll make one more comment about that. And it's a lesson that I learned in my first 2 weeks in Congress. And some of our friends say that the solution to our debt and deficit challenges is that we need to raise taxes. Well, we've done that already. We've done that quite well in Washington. Not me, because I wasn't there. But when they passed Obamacare, Obamacare is a tax bill, a massive increase in federal taxes on the middle class, on people who can't afford health insurance. We're punishing people who can't afford health insurance with higher taxes. We're punishing the innovation of medical device manufacturers by taxing not the profits, but the revenues of medical device manufacturers, destroying jobs, shipping jobs overseas, and stifling life-saving and life-improving medical innovation like pacemakers and prosthetic hips and all kinds of medical devices that actually improve lives. And we're punishing that in Obamacare. So it's really outrageous. But we can do a whole lot better than that. And in my first week in Congress, it was right after the fiscal cliff agreement, which was a huge new tax on mostly the wealthiest Americans. But the bill raised about $620 billion over 10 years. So that works its way out to about $62 billion per year. Well, the first vote that I had to cast was a vote on Hurricane Sandy relief, disaster assistance for the folks who had been hit by the hurricane in the Northeast. Well, there were a whole lot of votes. I voted for getting direct assistance to the victims, $17 billion in direct aid offset by spending cuts elsewhere in the budget. And that's what I voted for. But there were other bills to provide additional relief with no offsets. But it wasn't relief for the victims of Hurricane Sandy. It was a new roof for the Smithsonian. It was for fisheries in Alaska. It was billions of dollars for the National Weather Service. And it was not directed exclusively toward the victims and to rebuild the Northeast and the damage that happened there. And so I was on the losing side of that vote. I voted against the final bill, which was a package of $61 billion with no offsets. A huge appropriations bill with pork and waste in it, and things totally unrelated to helping the victims of Hurricane Sandy. And what that taught me was that after Congress had raised taxes to the tune of $62 billion for the year, within a matter of 10 days, they spent every dime. Now, what does that tell you? That tells you that raising taxes is a lousy deficit reduction strategy. Because when politicians get